In this video we're going to look at how to sketch graphs on the graphical calculator. So if you turn your calculator on, you've got a graph option, which in this case is number 5. So if I select that, you should find you get a screen like this. The majority of the time you want it to be a y equals. If it doesn't say y equals at the top, if you're going to type, you can select different versions and click it there. This first graph is a nice straightforward quadratic. So I want to type in x squared. I'm always using this x theta t button for my x. So x squared plus x minus 6. And then once you finish typing the function, if you press execute, it should appear like that. If you want more than one graph on the page, you can type in multiple ones. Now if I press execute again, it will come up with the graph on the screen. Sometimes though, like here, it's not exactly what we want. So we need to use V window, which is F3, to control the axes. So if I select this, you can see you've got your x min and max and your y min and max. Now if you want to, you can control these manually, but there are some preset ones across the bottom, and you'll find that these are quite useful. The one that I tend to go for first is F3, which is standard. There is a separate one if you're doing a trig graph. If I select standard, it goes between 10 and minus 10 on both axes. And then if I press execute to go back, I can now see my graph much better. If this doesn't work, either go back into V window and change them manually, or you can go into zoom and you can zoom in and out. If you click in, it will come up with a little cross, and you can manipulate the cross to wherever it is that you want to zoom in on, and then press execute. Other options in Zoom are auto, so you can ask it what it thinks it should set them to. Or you can use box, which allows you to create a box around the bit you want to go into, and there's lots of other options that you can play around with. But for now I'm going to go back to V window and leave it as standard. So the main things that you would want to know if you're asked to sketch a graph, whatever the graph may be, is where it crosses the x and y axes. So in GSolve, which is F5, this is a really useful button. I can click on that and root will tell me where it crosses the x-axis. So I can see that it crosses at -3, and if I want to get to the other one, if I press across, it will show that it crosses at 2. If I press across again, there are no more solutions, so it will stop there. If I want the y-intercept, that's F4, which says y-intercept, and it will tell me that that is 0 and -6. I might also want any minimum and maximum points. So if I go to GSolve and max on this one, it comes up and says not found, which is what we're expecting. We know that a positive quadratic has no maximum point. If I go back to my graph and do minimum, it will tell me that the coordinates of my minimum point are minus 0.5 for x and minus 6.25 for y. If you're looking at functions, particularly in C3, and you want the range, this is really useful. So in this question, the range will be that f of x is greater than or equal to minus 6.25. Remember, the range is always the values that it takes on the y-axis. Other things you might want to do, you might want to work out particular calculation. So again in GSolve, but on the second screen, you've got y and x calc. So if you want to know what y is when x is 2, for example, if I click y calc, I can tell it that x is 2, and it will tell me across the bottom that y is 0, and the same with the x calc. And you can put in any value for that. Now the second example I've got here is the same graph, but it's asking for the modulus function of it. Now you'll only do this if you've done C3. So if I go back to my original graph, to find the modulus we want the absolute, and we have to go into option. It comes up with all these. We want number, which is F5, and then abs. And it will come up with these little square brackets. If you're doing this on the blue calculator, it will say abs, and then you'll need to put the bracket in. So I can now say x squared plus x minus 6, and it will draw the modulus graph for me. And again, I could now try GSolve and maximum, and it will now tell me the coordinates of that point. There are some slight glitches with it. So if I try GSolve and minimum, oh, on this one it works. Sometimes it does come up with an error message. On the last question we're going to look at then, it's got an exponential. So if I go back again, this time I'm going to do 2e to the power of x. So I type it in. If you've got the blue calculator, so the 9750, whatever the power is, you often need to put in a bracket. So I press execute, I can see my graph. Okay, I might want to do GSolve and the y-intercept. which it tells me here is 2. Now it looks like the graph either stops or merges onto the x-axis. If I do gsolve and root, it tells me that there's none found. So it is telling me that it's not going to cross the x-axis at all. So you should know this about an exponential anyway. You might choose to zoom in so you can see it a bit closer, but again it does still look like it stops, so you've got to know some properties of a graph. Other options, you might want to go and trace. So if I go and trace, I can see what happens to the x. So as the x is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, I can see what happens to my y value. And it's just getting closer and closer and closer to 0. So you can use the trace as well to move around the various points.